Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another week of Growing with my fellow growers. I'm your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel. First, I will pass it over to Spartan Grown.
Thanks, Jack. I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word, no spaces. Make sure it's just like it is. Well, actually, there's a space on my screen. I should change that. Otherwise, you can shoot me an email at spartangrown@gmail.com. That's probably the best place to get a hold of me. I'll get to you. I don't think I missed any of my emails. And I actually just started my YouTube channel up today. I did upload one video, but it's kind of a selfish reason. I'm just going to take the questions I get the most and I'm going to make videos. So now I can just send people links instead of having to explain the same thing over and over. So it's very a little selfish.
I'm already doing that with your Instagram. You've got your reamendment post, and I'm like, I used to send people a list, like broken down step by step of what you sent to me along like 2, maybe 3 years ago now. And now I send that same list as well as a copy of the post that you made on Instagram. And
nice.
I'm loving.
So that's what I did today on YouTube. It was a reamendment video. I was like, I'm gonna do that one because that's the one I get asked the most.
That's definitely a great one, man. And I'm happy that you can put it on YouTube so it's easier to share and more people get access to it. Next up, I'm going to introduce Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, yeah, Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. I am excited to do a Q&A show and get to, interact more with the audience today. So yeah, you can find me on YouTube, there on Dr. MJ Coco channel, on Instagram, and of course at cocoforcannabis.com.
Happy to have you back as always. Next up, Matthew Gates.
Hey everyone, this is Matthew Gates. I'm an integrated test management specialist. For those who don't know, I just did a live stream on my Instagram channel, Sync Angel. That's SYNCHANGEL. And we discussed bud rot management. So you can check that out. I also have an edit of that on my YouTube channel, Zenthonol, which is the same account I am chatting in the chat zone with.
It's interesting. Speaking of the chat, I notice on my web browser, it still says live chat and top chat, but on my phone, it says all messages or top messages. So if you want to see all the messages, you can select that top or all messages versus the some messages or top messages, whatever it is. So next up, I want to introduce the last panelist who's with us. I think Noah's going to be joining us soon, but we've got next the American one.
Hello, Jack, panel, everyone in chat. I am the American One on YouTube and the American One _with _Keens on the IG. And yeah, it's always good to be here. I hope everyone had a great weekend and looking forward to the week. And yeah, I saw Doc earlier on Crispy and Smart Poker for a minute. That was cool. And I saw Spartan Grown on Hemp with Gigi for a minute too. So it was cool seeing you guys out there. And yeah, Matthew Gates was on oh, now I forget. But anyway, it's always good seeing everybody out and about.
Well, you're the one that gets out and about the most, it sounds like there, Tao. So thank you for supporting all those shows and creators too.
It's cool, yeah.
Tao and his genetics are everywhere. Mr. Worldwide. He's called the American One, but he's really the international one.
The international one. I like it.
I will put him on the spot because he's always got good questions. Tao, you've been in one of the reviews somebody wrote, they said Tao is like the everyman sometimes. He asks the questions that we want to hear. So you started off tonight and throw a question at us that you've been thinking about, because I know you've always got a good one on your mind at some point, cannabis related or otherwise.
Yeah, you know what came up recently, which I was thinking about, like I guess I never really took very long clones. People are saying like 8 to 10 inch clones. That's pretty freaking long. I usually do about half that. And then for a while, I was doing really baby ones. And I mean, I've had success all the way across, some better than others. And at certain times, way better than others. But what do you guys think is the most proficient at creating a new plant? Like, doesn't even have to be quickness, more like success.
I would go right in between all of that, to be honest.
Okay, there you go.
Like 6 to 7 inch clones or cuttings usually, but like you're saying, I mean, you can take like a 3 or 4 inch cutting and root it. There's a little bit less sort of plant to work with. I think going the other way and getting a larger cutting, you risk sort of not rooting before the plant. This larger surface area, you're going to have a harder time sort of getting that sometimes. But so there's a sweet spot. Before the plant basically dehydrates.
The other thing I think about when taking clones is back in the day, I did in those little 1x1 rock wool cubes. And I'm trying to remember now what size I took. I think I took the size like you're kind of alluding to, like in between there. But does it matter how much you bury of the stem? You don't want to bury too far in certain situations where it get stem rot. But
right.
Yeah,
it certainly depends on how you're cloning too.
Yeah. Because in dirt, it's different. Yeah. Because I'm trying to figure out how, I'm nervous to reuse my soil for clones because I think it has, it might be too hot and it's just an unknown variable. But if I start with fresh pro mix, it's good. But then I have to get pro mix all the time. I'm trying to get as people like closed loop as much as possible right now. That would be great.
It's tough. Because you want a really neutral media that's low EC for cloning.
Yep.
And reusing it's tough. You're sort of fighting uphill. You almost always have to introduce new media into a grow. You're going to lose some through various processes. So even if you try to recycle as best as you possibly can, you're going to need to add some new media. And this is where I would add it. I would add a little fresh plug of peat to start your clones every time. And
maybe that's the answer. A plug of peat would be better.
Well, and even if you don't lose it, peat breaks down into a point where it becomes like dust, and it's just not as good as when it's a little bit chunkier and better with aeration. It'll become that dust and then it becomes lime.
But it becomes part of your soil, or whatever you're growing in, basically, when you transplant up. But and I do understand the closing the loop there, but it's tough. You got to think about your odds of success and reliability of the system.
How important? Yeah, definitely.
I'll throw my hat.
How did you guys do it though? At when you worked at the commercial spot, or did you buy your clothes?
Muskin Spartan?
Yeah, Muskin Spartan. Yeah.
To answer that question specifically, we use peat plugs. We use root right cubes.
Okay.
In clone domes and trays on a 3 shelf up against the wall, about as far away from the light as we can get it. It was just getting barely any side lighting from the regular veg lights.
And now if you want to go the other way, you could go, if you want to really be like close the loop, you could just clone in air and water. You do either hydro cloning or aero cloning, and
that was my suggestion. Permaclone collars, you can sterilize them.
I was gonna get to that point with Tao. Is like, it's important to know how you're cloning, because for me specifically at home, I prefer the oxycloner, and I want a longer stem for that, because I want it to go down and be into the water. I want that. So if I'm taking an oxyclone cutting, then I'm taking a longer cutting for sure.
Got it.
And it's more root, even whether it's in the
generally speaking, I mean, obviously you guys brought up great points for, you can get too big for sure. But generally speaking, a bigger clone is going to give you a bigger plant to start out with. So why not go for that? I kind of err on the side of a little bit larger maybe, but I like to have a little bit bigger plant, and I like to strip off all the leaves, but just the 2 top ones, so that I don't have to lollipop in veg usually, because I've got a nice clone that's already got it lollipops, man.
That oxyclone's amazing. I've put 12-inch thumb-sized cuts, like basically full plants that had to be like cut down to be reset for a number of reasons, and they were like blowing out the collar, but it still worked. It just it's amazing what those things are able to do. And if you keep it clean, that's the main thing. You really have to sterilize it and clean it. And the other thing is, it's hard during the summertime if you don't have a chiller. I suggest it's like a frozen water bottle, or some, like, they make these ice cubes that are not really ice cubes. They're like plastic or synthetic, whatever. You throw them in your freezer, and you could just drop a couple of those in there to regulate the temperature down, because if it gets too hot, they're not going to root as well, and you're going to start to get slime and biofilm and stuff building up on your pumps. And I don't really even like air stones.
People make the mistake to think that has to be in their grow. Move that goddamn cloner into your house or into a fucking spare bedroom or somewhere where it's cooler. Just ambient temperature cooler. You doesn't have to be in the grow getting baked by lights if you're struggling with heat temperature. Just get that fucking thing out of there.
Well, the
It's just a
clones want
cloner.
it to
It
be
doesn't need
pretty
a ton of
warm.
light.
They just don't want it to be, you know.
For me, we just
well,
don't have AC. So like my general house, no matter where you're at in the heat of the summer, like
Oh,
at
okay.
a certain time, it's going to get too hot. My grow is so tiny. It's like in a tent separated probably 10 or 15 feet away from where the clones are at. It's just the circulation in that area is not the greatest. You know, it's a cabinet. I go very minimalist. There's like a little fan on it. It's in a kitchen cabinet, and I've got a little under the shelf LED kind of thing, but it works. And I can't complain. Like I've had so much success with clones, and I always, like you kind of talked about your YouTube at the beginning, I have a post where I used the oxycloner the first couple times and demonstrated it. Like, here's the cut, the size, and everything, and like here's the result, and here's how I transplant and everything. And it's nice to have as a reference point, because once you get a system that works for you, I think a lot of people stick with that until maybe it doesn't work anymore. But it's good to know multiple methods. I used to do the root riots or rapid rooters
Yep.
as well. I've never been a huge rock wool fan, just generally, but it does work very well for clones. I've seen a lot of really, really great success from commercial to home settings where people just, that's the one that will work for them. And even if they're like in a living soil organic, they just love rock wool clone because that's been the most successful for them. So I'm curious what Noah the grower thinks, because I know you're a pretty regular clone taker. So what kind of methodology do you take, and how large?
How's it going, everybody? Yeah, I've done all. I've been listening very intently. I've done all the things. I actually just sprung for the permacollars myself, and this is my first run of it within my Aero cloner. I have a turbo cloner, 24 site one. I actually have another one too, but this one I've had forever, and I just love it. But I've done the root riot things. I've done like my local hydro store had like these like their own little like peat moss things I used to use for a while that were pretty good. And but I will second that once you get to a really good method that that works for you, then like that's what you want to stick with. But I heard Spartan say that you don't want it right directly in your light, you want it kind of indirect light, and I totally agree with that too. So once you start kind of doing it more and more and more, you just kind of get what works for it. But and then also inside those aero cloners, you got to be careful because it will get warm, and sometimes they'll kind of like just drink water, or like the water will kind of like dissipate like through like, you know, like just on the side and stuff. So you kind of want to make sure you're checking that constantly, and you can kind of like change out your water. It'll help with that biofilm. It'll help that, you know, the temperature in there too. And yeah, cloning is always it's one of the most basic things, but you're constantly learning. I mean, I've been doing it for 11, 12 years, and I'm constantly switching stuff up, trying new things, and just, you know, experiment with it.
It's definitely an interesting process, and I do know that's one thing a lot of people do struggle with. I even got a little soil blocker thing that I was going to use more for popping seeds, but it could also be used for making little plugs if you wanted to reuse your own medium. It's like a little,
That's cool.
you know, on Amazon, you get them for like 15, 20 bucks. It's a little
I was
handheld.
surprised when you sent me that. I thought it was gonna be more expensive, man. When you found it was all metal too. It wasn't some plastic one.
Yeah, I mean, it's all metal. The one exception is like there's these little plastic tips that give you different sizes and depths for the blocks. And the thing that in just playing around with it, I found out is you have to get the soil pretty wet to get them to hold together and block well, but you don't have to plant directly after you make them. So I get the soils kind of blocked out and then let it dry a little bit before I plant into it. And I don't know, it's a interesting process, and I definitely think you can use the same thing for taking clones if you wanted to start in the soil that you're going to go into for your veg and then use in flower type thing like that, so that it kind of gets used to what it's going to be growing in the rest of the time. That was the reason I started with it, and it's interesting to play with. But if I was to take clones today, I'd still probably go with the oxyclone, just because I've had so much success with it.
Yeah.
And you know, if you really want to make sure you're preserving something, I think you want to go with your tried and true method, because you never want to lose that genetic. That's a really, I've had it happen. It's a bad feeling to lose that plant that you really love. So
Yeah.
definitely take multiple cuts and use the tried and true method when it's something like that.
Also with those aero cloner, oxycloner things, when you look at them, when you clean them, those little things that come off that kind of will change directions. So when you look in there, you kind of want to make sure it's one that's spraying. Like some of the little sites, there won't be as much water. I like ones that are kind of like, you know, maybe not just like pouring on it, spraying it, but you want to kind of make sure. And then like, that can kind of be like another thing is that if I want to take like 10 clones, I'll fill the whole thing up knowing that I'm only going to keep 10, because you'd be surprised. Sometimes you're like, oh shoot, I took 3 clones and only one of them lived. That's only happened a few times, but sometimes that'll happen. So I always just take way more than just toss what I don't use.
I think it's important what you said earlier too about to change the water. Like I keep track on like a little dry race board that I keep right next to my cloner, because I use that to label what is what. But I have a date, and I just put last water change, because I like to change the water at least at the very least once a week. And I'm using just straight tap water. I'm not even putting anything in it, because I'm counting on the chlorine. I want the chlorine in the city water and all that keeps the bacteria and everything down. I'm just using that's free, sending to me in my pipes. So I'm changing that water out more often to address those issues, to keep it clean, to re-up my chlorine levels, and all that good stuff, to keep everything nice and clean for me. And I just happen to not have to use any rooting hormones. I'm taking cuttings and sticking them in my oxycloner and changing the water. And that's all I'm doing.
Some people have even said that the use of some of these hormones has maybe had implications for hop latent viroid transmission. And especially since apparently it gets into the roots very commonly, and it's easier to take samples and get a positive from that area. It could be that the hormones sort of facilitate movement in the plant.
I just had a couple extra notes on the oxyclone use. Was I don't use the pump inside the actual water. I just have air pump outside, and I run 2 little tubes in to get the oxygen flowing through, because it's easier to either disinfect or just cut off a little bit of that tube each time you use it than trying to clean the air stones. I've seen people do a bunch of different things with air stones and not necessarily always be happy with them. And even the pump itself is really hard to clean. So if you don't have to have that in the water, which I personally don't think you do, it can be beneficial for just ease of use. And the other note I was going to say is you can actually fit more than 1 clone in those collars. It's not ideal, but like if you get like the 20 site and you want to take 40 clones, or if you get the smallest one or whatever, and you need to take more, you can double or even triple up. I've had success with 3. It gets to be a little bit of a mess with 3 because the bundle of roots, pulling them apart, you're going to end up damaging and breaking some off. But 2, I think, is pretty common, and you can be fairly successful. Ideally, just 1 per. But and getting it before they get super long,
like the cross. You know how it makes a cross in the clone? Use each point of the cross to put it. So 1 at that point, 1 at this point, 1 at that point. If I have to do 3, that's
you can pull it to the corners. So they're not touching
it kind of keeps
directly.
them separated.
No, that's a great point. Because those collars are like, they're like a foam type material, or the permaclone are kind of like more rubberized, but you can open them up and then slide each clone into each little slot and make it so that their stems aren't directly rubbing up against one another, because I think that's asking for pathogen and other issues. So the other thing that I was just going to finish up with the oxyclone is you don't want to let the roots grow. Like I see some people like want to do like root porn and like lift up the thing and have like 20-inch long roots. It might look cool, but I think it really makes it difficult to plant into a medium. Like if you're going to go into a solo cup or a 1 gallon, they're really long and straggly. I think like, within an inch or 2, that's probably as long as you might need. You can also cut them back like Spartan's demonstrating. But yeah, I don't, if they get left in there a little longer, that's fine. But I don't think it should be like your SOP to let them grow like 10, 15, 20 inches long, even though that might be what looks really cool on Instagram when you see like somebody lift it up and just all these big white healthy roots. It's a bunch of them I think are going to get cut back or damaged in the transplant process and not necessarily even be ideal. Some people have kind of talked about the idea of like, is there a difference between like a water root versus roots that grow in soil or like a coco medium? So I don't see a huge, and I've gone from the oxycloner to coco, and I've gone from the oxycloner to soil, and both of them seem to just take right off and not have any issues. So I think as long as you transplant it successfully, I'm using a little bit of mycorrhizal at that point, but even without it, I've seen them just take right off just fine. So I'm not sure if there's too much validity of like the difference between a water root versus a root that's in a medium like soil or coco. I have highlighted a few questions though, unless anybody else has more thoughts on the initial discussion that we could get into. A few of them are actually clone related, unbeknownst. Maybe it was because of the conversation we were already having. But Kade Armstrong has one that's not clone related. If we're ready to get into that. All right. Sounds like we are. They say,
Good.
at Cheap Home Grow, would you suggest using a 50-50 cocoa soil mix? Would you have to buffer the cocoa?
I'll take that one. At least start that one. Yeah, sure. There's good 50-50 mixes with peat and cocoa. It kind of depends on why. So I would ask you sort of like, what are you hoping to get out of that? I definitely think that the cocoa helps make the peat a little bit better. The peat in certain ways takes some of the stress off the CalMag issue. I would use a sort of a high porosity blend of potting soil or peat, and then you can basically treat it just like I would treat cocoa for the most part if you stay in small enough containers. So sure, but I would want to know sort of is there a reason to want to do that? I think you can grow in all just one or the other. And I'm not sure that there's tremendous sort of benefits to mixing them. Now I do start plants like seedlings again, like or clones in a peat plug, but go from there and put that into cocoa myself. And the reason for that is that peat is better buffered, so you can run a lower EC and not show up with CalMag deficiencies than cocoa is. But in peat, if it's a high porosity peat, then you can water it pretty much as frequently as you can with cocoa. They're both soilless. They're both hydroponic. So, unless you're adding other things to it to do nutrition, then you're going to be growing hydroponically with sort of fertigating in your nutrients. And when you're fertigating, I personally, and there's a lot of sort of science to back this up, think that high frequency fertigation sort of unlocks the best growth potential. So but again, you can still basically do that with peat. I think some of the downsides to doing that, and the reason that I wouldn't just do that all the time, is peat is a sort of non-renewable resource. And it has a bigger environmental impact growing in peat than it does growing in cocoa. So I would encourage you to think about, hey, could I just do what I'm trying to do in cocoa too? Those are my thoughts.
I think that I'm with you on pick one or the other and then, go with that. And I think if you're going to go peat, you're probably going to be taking the organic path and amending other things into it. I don't see as many people these days choosing peat as their primary medium for hydroponic, although it was used for a long time. In Canada, I think still so. I see a lot of Pro Mix used up there. Cocoa, I think, is really taken the lion's share of the market for hydro, at least from who I interact with. I don't know about the
look at everybody that grows like the Fox Farm products. I think the Ocean Forest, the Fox Farm, Ocean Forest, and then it sort of starts off with those peat-based bends, and they're using the Fox Farm nutrients or some other nutrients, fertigating in nutrients after like a veg period. That's a fairly common way for growers to grow in peat, whether it's with that sort of particular style or with another. But I don't assume that growers in peat are necessarily amending, or certainly that they're amending organic inputs. I see a lot of growers fertigating in peat.
Well, and I think Noah the Grower is one of them, or was one of them for a while, and he's recently switched over to a more peat-based, like Bio 365 soil and other things like that. But I do see a lot of people, I think, start with Fox Farm and they stick with it for a while. But I do think a lot of those people end up either going into cocoa or other forms of hydro like DWC, or either trying like peat-based blends and things like that. Whether it's like a subcool super soil or something from Build a Soil or a Coots mix. There's so many things out there. I think a lot of growers are kind of tinkerers, and we're curious. We like to try many different things. And once you look kind of into Fox Farm, a lot of people get disappointed by it because if they're not in a large enough pot.
Holding it up. I'm just saying it's an incredibly common gateway into being a home grower.
Oh, for sure.
And I think a lot of people approach home growing with the idea that I need to get me some potting soil, and then I need to get me some bottled nutrients to feed to my cannabis plants. And, they try to look around and cast about sort of what the best ways to do that. But a lot of brand new growers or people considering growing sort of have that set of expectations. And yeah, I don't know. So I think that that's all of those. That is true. I think cocoa can be part of a organic soilless, or an organic, option for an amended grow, and that's probably where blending peat and cocoa, I think, makes the most sense. Using some portion of cocoa when you're mixing up your quote unquote sort of super soils or other heavily amended soils for growing in an organic style, because cocoa has some interesting properties that it can contribute to that sort of soil.
That's kind of how I was completely opposite of the way Dr. Coco, and that's why I love these shows, the way Dr. Coco and Jack were kind of talking. I was going to approach that question completely opposite from the organic side, and caution against that high of a split of 50-50, and really encourage about a 30% cocoa and stick with that, a third mix with your basic organic mix, and use that cocoa as one of the thirds for aeration. Cocoa is a great one for the aeration portion of that mix. And so it could take up that whole mix if you wanted to, that whole 30%, and then use your peat for the other 30, and then compost for the other 30. And there's your basic mix right there. And it can totally be worked into, it's an organic substance. So it's not like it has to be used for synthetic nutrients or because it's very common and works very well with synthetic nutrients, doesn't mean that's the only thing it works with. It's 100% has a place in organics as well. And it often is used for aeration, because that's what's really good at. Even fully saturated, it has a lot of air.
Well, you can even go coco style
for water retention, because it holds back a lot of water in those situations.
It's kind of like a vermiculite. It's kind of like
it can be either. It could be the aeration, or in the a third, where it's typically a third, Canadian sphagnum, peat moss, and then a third aeration and a third compost. If you use cocoa instead of peat in that mix, you can use something like pumice or rice hulls or other things. Coco Loco is a pretty common blend. I think it's actually made by Fox Farm, but instead of using peat, they use cocoa, and I'm pretty sure they use the same nutrient blend within there, and so it's essentially just an alternative option
too. So it's heavier. It's a little bit heavier than cocoa. It's got worm castings blended in, but yeah, I've grown in that, and it does very well.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an option that is out there and working. So,
and one of the reasons to I agree with everything Spartan said. It's funny that he's like, we're coming at this from different perspectives, but yeah, I definitely agree with that. 30% is probably better in a soil grow like that. And I think the question asked, is buffering still necessary? I would say yes, it's definitely still a good idea. And that's one of the reasons why you're going to want, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why you may not want to go as high as a ratio of 50% if you're not fertigating, because the cocoa will always be a little bit hungry for CalMag, and it will take that out of other solutions. So it's something to be aware of. The larger percentage of cocoa that you use, sort of the bigger that issue is going to be. If cocoa is a minority player in your mix, then plants are pretty easily able to sort of get enough Cal and Mag and avoid those issues.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes to answer the second part of the question about, do I need to buffer the cocoa using it? And I think along the lines of what you're going into right now is like, yeah, the more cocoa you're using, if you're using 50% cocoa, I would say yes, you need to buffer your cocoa.
Right.
Losing 30%, I wouldn't worry about it so much.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of why you use the 30%. Right. I mean, instead, it just is a little bit easier on CalMag all throughout that grow.
One of my buddies, who's a very successful grower, he uses Fox Farms at about 20-30% cocoa. And whenever we go somewhere, his weed is just as good as anybody's. So, and he uses like an organic based bottled nutrients. So it can be worked that way too. I know a guy who does it for sure.
Yeah. Well, there's like a lot of different ways to grow cannabis plants.
I was going to say, even in peat, that they can tend to be pretty calcium hungry, and front loading just calcium or like gypsum and things like that can help mitigate some. I think Brandon uses lots of that when he tests his soil, and he notices that a few things are being eaten up a lot more than other things. And a lot of people like to say that, oh, cannabis can't be hungry for this or that, but the soil tests, I think pretty much confirm that it truly is hungry for certain specific nutrients more so than others in certain environments. So I heard people kind of scoff at, saying it's a this or that hungry plant, but like when you're agronomically testing the soil, it's, pretty definitive that it is hungry for, X, Y, or Z. And in this case, I do think calcium is a pretty major one that it shows, whether in especially in cocoa, because cocoa, the material naturally has the tendency to
Right.
want to yank it away because how it operates, the cation exchange and everything like that.
Well, that's the thing. Cannabis plants definitely want a pretty heavy dose of calcium and magnesium, like all cannabis plants. I mean, we're trying to grow plants pretty fast and put on a great deal of sort of weight, right, into their flowers. And so we've got to support that. One of the ways that we grow plants that quickly is by supporting them with fairly large doses of calcium and magnesium. In all of the different styles of fertilization, we account for making sure that the cannabis plants get pretty good doses of calcium and magnesium. The challenge in cocoa is that cocoa also binds with calcium and magnesium. And so it prevents the plant from getting that fairly large dose that cannabis plants want in order to grow well. And when we're pushing the plant to grow well in other ways, it'll start to show nutrient deficiencies pretty quickly in cocoa, because basically the point you're making, like all cannabis plants want calcium and magnesium. And if you take it away from them, they get grumpy pretty fast. So yeah. Indeed.
I don't like I feel like I'm not trying to tell people not to speak a certain way, but I think that's one of the downsides of using euphemisms like the plant is hungry for it. Like the physics of how the nutrients get into the plant. I don't know. I wouldn't use that term. I feel like it creates this idea that, like we just said, like that the plant's like, oh, I'm not going to eat that. Like there's a sort of intellect to it, when in reality that's actually one of the problems with both nutrients getting over fertilization or under fertilization is that it's not like the plant can say no. Like that's what's happening. The nutrient goes through anyways, or what other substances do and causes damage to the plant. There's actually not an off switch. The off switch is that the roots get burned or something.
Yeah, or the things get out of whack in other ways. I agree. I also don't like thinking about the eating specific terms. I wish we never called it plant food, because I think that connotes the wrong ideas about the flow of energy through the systems. It's not the source of energy for the plants.
It's more like respiration, kind of.
It's like a building block, sort of. I feel like the energy really comes from the light and the CO2. Like most of
exactly.
It really comes from the light. The energy comes from the light. The carbon comes from the CO2. Right. But the carbon isn't really the source of the energy. And things like nitrogen are used, in the process of synthesizing certain photosynthate and to sort of mitigate other cellular pressures, but they're not the source of the energy. The source of the energy is the photons that arrive from the light. Right. And if you want the plants to have more energy, you need to give them sort of more light. And a lot of people think that you can sort of change and give them less light as long as you're giving them more nutrients, because like the nutrients they'll eat it or something, like it'll replace the light. It's not at all.
I think the better analogy would be is the light is the food and mineral is your vitamin.
Yeah, I think the nutrients are the vitamins too. I think
nutrients are just your little vitamin that you take during the day, and that's all you're really given. And the bulk of their energy and everything is coming from those lights.
For sure. Good points. And I think that we definitely answered Kade Armstrong's question very well there. And Sal Blydenburgh says, at Cheap Home Grow, taking clones in the first few weeks of flower, bad idea, ? And I guess I'll pass it first to Noah.
I wouldn't do it like, like as a practice, but if you need to, like I've definitely done it, like if I had where I just was lazy and didn't clone on time or forgot to clone one, or like, oh, I really want this back, or I've definitely done it. I've done it to where there was buds on them and I cloned like 3-4 weeks in, but yeah, it's not ideal. It makes it a little harder in my opinion. That's my experience.
What do you think, Tal?
Sorry, I wasn't quick on the mute, but yeah, I say cloning is a good all the time, but yeah, no, you want to, if you get the plant and veg, healthy plant and veg, and you take a cutting of that and try and make it grow roots, it'll have a much better, quicker chance of doing it than when it's in flower. But yeah, I've taken them when I was harvesting a plant and it works. So if it's if it's that kind of situation, you could definitely do it. But if you're going, some people do it on purpose. They call it what do they call it? Monster cropping.
Monster cropping. It's funny because
that's
we've
it.
got a re-veg and a monster crop question. And what's the latest
the
you
same
would take
thing.
a clone after flip? All right
Yeah,
after this
I
question.
don't like the monster. I don't like the monster crop either because it makes it spindly. The new branches are all weak and
And
yeah,
the hormones
I don't
have to be messed up with that
Yeah, it's
process.
all-
Going flower, back to
just-
veg, back to flower as like
There
a
you
regular
go.
process. I think
Yeah.
that would be probably your most likely
Yep.
to see intersex plants or hermaphrodism.
I mean, it's fine if what
but
you're
as a
doing is
last
just
resort-
experimenting and having fun with plants in your grow space or whatever. But if you're trying to do production, like nobody's going to be monster cropping for like consistent production. Zero
Right.
people are going to do
I
that.
had a guy who tried to argue he got his biggest yields off monster crop, but then he would post like a nug and then it would be like a 10-gram nug. And then like 2 posts later, he'd post it blocked out and he'd be like, this is a 40-gram nug. And like this guy was like all over the place. I was like, his claims are a little bit suspect. And I
Yeah.
followed him for a while and it never really showed to be demonstrated very effectively. And I don't even know if he's still on the gram anymore, but yeah.
I mean, the way I look at it is a lot. I mean, I'm going to echo a lot of what was already said, but I mean, if you preserve, if the whole thing is you're trying to preserve the genetics and that's your last ditch option, by all means, yes, take a clone at any point in the plant's life. It's going to be harder for that thing to take and strike if you take it in flower at any period, and the longer you go in flower, the harder it gets. And at some point in flower, it's going to go from just a regular cutting clone to I've got to root and re-veg. That's what they're talking about with monster crop. It's actually just re-vegging as it's rooting. So it takes a long time, and it makes it harder to be successful. And then the last thing that you brought up was the re-veg itself is like, it's another option. Is like, if you're just trying to save genetics, you can wait till harvest and just harvest the top 2/3 of the plant and leave the bottom third of the plant. You know what I mean? With enough vegetative growth there for it to be able to get light again. So you take that pot, that's the bottom third, and you put it back in the veg room, and it's going to look ugly for a while, but eventually it's going to get some nice, decent growth out of it that you can cut a regular clone and cutting off of, but it's going to take a while. So like, these are all options for sure, but none of those are great options. You know, the best option is like what, everybody said is, get a good healthy clone off or cutting off of a plant in veg while it's still in the veg phase. Now the hormones aren't trying to change, or it's set up ready to go to be successful. So yes, you can do it, but not a great practice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Spartan. It's a rescue mission at that point. I mean, you're doing it to rescue the genetics or whatever. You're not doing it to actually like clone per se, right? You're doing that because, and at that point, I like your idea of like, trying to save the plant off the other end too. And if you really want to save the genetics, pull a bunch of clones off of it because you might not get them all to root. And then, do what Spartan's saying there, just harvest the top, and you can probably harvest the top all but one branch. And leave that one branch and try to re-veg that as sort of the last safety insurance measure on this plant. But it's definitely tough, again, to his point, to both do a re-veg and a rooting at the same time, and it will definitely have lower odds of success than your standard clone run.
So I have 2 thoughts on this. Initially, like, mistakes were made. That's like first thought, and not, it happens to everybody. We've all done this. But 2, possible, yes. Ideal, no. So just to summarize it briefly, and if anybody else has any thoughts, we can discuss them now. Otherwise, I think we're going to go lightning round on these next couple questions.
I have one thought. If you got to do this, take your clones before the end of the bolt or before the end of the stretch. That 3 weeks where the plants are still growing, you're definitely going to have an easier time rooting a plant at the beginning, like during that period of the flowering time, which it sounds like he was at, right? As opposed to waiting a few more weeks and trying to re-veg something that's like 4, 5, 6 weeks into flowering. I'll just say that.
Good point. Anybody else have any thoughts on that one before we do a little lightning round on related questions? So we can just kind of give like a 1-sentence answer, because these were all very similar to what we just discussed. But yeah, I think that we all kind of tapped in there. And if you have any thoughts, speak now or forever hold your peace. Let's see what's next.
Go for it.
Ausbucket says, what's the latest after flip you would take a clone? And again, this is like, you could take it all the way up to harvest, but not ideal. I personally just within the first 3 weeks is like Doc was saying, before the bolt stops for me, if I'm trying to like really not give myself a bunch of headache in the process. But I will, if it was like the super most specialist unicorn of plant at harvest, I, instead of doing what Spartan was saying, I'll give one little difference of advice there. Instead of harvesting like the top 2/3 or however much of the plant and leaving the last little bit and trying to get those to re-veg, I would take a cutting off of those little lowers and then try and root that and re-veg that, because watering the cutting is a lot easier than watering that plant that used to be way larger, and now you're trying to water this tiny little thing.
I just want to set the
Would
record
you root
straight.
it under
Spartan-
12/12?
Spartan
Sorry,
would do both.
24 hours.
Spartan would do both. I would do both.
That's a good point. Good point. Yeah. You do both because that gives you the most chance at success, because the one that's already got the root ball is going to stay alive, but it might not be as easy to get it to go as the one that you root as like a 6 to 10 inch cut.
I think that having that gigantic root ball is an advantage over a cutting with no roots. That's just my opinion of if I'm just trying to save genetics and I don't care if it's got to sit there for fucking 6 fucking months. If it fucking in 6 months gives me the growth where I can take a clone off of it, it's not dead.
That's a great point. I'm just coming from a smaller grow room perspective and taking up the smallest amount of room possible.
Oh, well, that's a good
trying to
point.
make it simple as
That's a good
possible
point.
on myself. But if, like I said, if it was the unicorn of unicorns, like the medicine that cured me of my ailment that I needed to rescue for whatever the reason, I would go to the ends of the earth for it. So like literally until it's harvestable or even past then. So that's my answer to that question. I think everybody else is kind of nodding. Tao and Noah, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I would do both. Like if it was in that situation that it's the shit that works for your medication. And because sometimes the re-veg fails too. I've seen that happen to me. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I rarely do it, but I've seen it happen to me once or twice. Yeah. If you don't leave enough material on the plant, or if it's like senesced so far that I don't know, maybe I don't know exactly, but yeah I would do
plant's
both.
committed to dying.
Yeah,
it's very
popular.
Popular for people to strip those leaves down low, and if you're just saving what's down low and there's no leaves and it's just bud, that's really hard to re-veg. Really, hard.
That's kind of what happened. Nope, it was just buds. It didn't have any.
It could get too bare, especially because we do
Yeah.
clean up the bottoms. That's a good practice to clean up the bottoms, and then you're left with like a bunch of stick with a very little, preemie bud that is not the easiest to re-veg. So good point there.
However, when we say you should not harvest like 90%, you don't actually have to harvest the top off the plant. You could harvest like the bottom off the plant and leave some branch 3/4 of the way up that's got good leaves on it or whatever. I think that might be something that you'd have to think long and hard about. But yeah, you definitely want to re-veg a plant that has leaves. You don't want to try to re-veg a plant that's like doesn't have leaves.
Yeah.
Right.
Great point. Noah, do you have any thoughts there?
No, I agree with all of that for sure.
For sure. And this one is specific to Dr. MJ, and I'm sure he's probably answered it a bunch of times before. So we'll knock this one out pretty quick, I'm sure. They say, how many fertigation events do you program in your cycle? What times of the day? And are all of the events the same duration / amount? Thanks.
Okay, so I do have like a handy little chart for you to figure out in one of the articles at cocoforcannabis.com. It's like the how to water plants in cocoa article, and it talks about fertigation frequency. All events are the same quantity. And basically the theory here is we're trying to keep the amount of saturation within a tight parameter, which is about, I run usually higher than this, but anywhere from 90 to 100% saturation. So when the plant dries out, or when the pod dries out by 10%, you want to water again. And you can use that to figure out sort of the ideal quantity for your size container. A container of cocoa, when it's fully saturated, will be about 50% water. So, and that's 100%. So like in a 5-gallon container, it's about 2.5 gallons of water. And watering at 10% dryback, I think, is a quart. Is that right? Yeah, it would be exactly a quart, because there'd be 10 quarts in 2.5 gallons. So if you find that, when you water a quart in a 5-gallon pot, you should get some runoff. If you're not, then you would increase sort of the frequency would be the best thing to do. But you don't need to have that big of a dryback. You can keep your cocoa between like 96 and 100% saturated, or 98 and 100% saturated, or some growers try to keep it pretty close to 100% saturated all the time, with higher and higher frequencies. So whenever you want to count frequencies, well, first of all, you use the chart in the How to Water Plants in Cocoa article in Cocoa for Cannabis. But if we start counting when the lights come on, there should be an event close to when the lights come on. And then if you have decided, like, I'm going to fertigate 5 times a day, then you would want to fertigate twice as often when the lights are on, and the gap in between waterings can be twice as long when the lights are off. I often get the question. I actually got the question. I was in the chat room at Cocoa for Cannabis today, and this question came up. Like, does that mean that we water when the lights are off sometimes? And yes, under sort of my schedule, on a high enough frequency, under 12-12 lighting, you water sometimes when the lights are off, because you want to have that dryback be the same. The dryback percentage, so when we're getting down to 90% saturation, that we're not so much concerned about the amount of water that's left, but what that means about how salty the salinity of the water that's left behind. So the EC is going up as the percentage of water goes down. So we want to sort of keep that balanced out. If you don't water at all under sort of a high enough frequency during the lights off period, then there's a bigger dryback. And that first event when the lights do turn on needs to be a higher amount of water. And that's just not as consistent of sort of an EC management practice throughout. But you can certainly make
that first fertigation has to be a higher volume of water, because now you've dried out and collected salts in your soil. So you're basically flushing.
Well, you're dry. It's not that you're collecting more salts necessarily. It's just that, there's a bigger water deficit then that you need to make up for, because it's been, the plant's been sucking out water for longer than the standard interval. And that's the other thing to realize, that like when we're top feeding plants like that, almost all the water goes to the plant. And the plant uses water, transpires water, not exactly, and it depends on VPD, in your specific space, but it's a fairly safe rule to estimate that plants are going to use water about twice as fast when the lights are on than they are when the lights are off. So you definitely can sort of increase the duration between events when the lights are off, but not sort of cut it out entirely, or you'll have a bigger dryback there and you'll have to make other compensations for it. It's not really the end of the world, but you then do have to make other compensations for it. No, that's probably a longer answer. And to the shortest answer is, I usually end up fertigating my plants 5 times a day in flower. It's a fairly easy schedule for me to set up in my program timer. If I grow,
how long are the events?
What's that?
How long are each event?
Oh, pretty short, like 24 seconds. And I play around with the number of seconds the events are. So it sort of depends. Each grow is a little bit different, because I crank down these ball valves on the individual halos that run into my plants, and you never get exactly the same flow rate out of those halos. So I time it. It's why it's really helpful to do this with a digital timer that you can program events in seconds, so that you can do an event that starts at like 8 a.m. and ends at 8 a.m. and 24 seconds. And then, when the plants grow and start using more water, you can either add an event, or we can just add a few seconds to each event. I always think about the overall number of seconds that the plants are getting fertigated in a day. So like 5 times on 20 seconds each time would be 100 seconds. And if I decide, I need to increase that, I could go to 5 times at 22 seconds, or I could do like 6 times and keep it at 20 seconds. Depends on, how I want to make those changes, but there's different ways to skin a cat, as it were. 5 or 6 times is generally a good practice for most home growers to get all the benefits of high frequency fertigation, almost regardless of container size.
Thank you very much for answering that specifically. I'm sure Sal Blydenburgh and many others out there will be happy to have gotten the clarity on that, because it's difficult sometimes reading guides and things like that. Some people are more auditory. Myself personally, I'm more of an auditory person, so reading a guide could be a little bit more difficult than listening to somebody speak through it all. So thank you, Doc, for clarifying that.
Cool.
Seed person one.
That's why we do the podcast, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. A little bit of visual, but mostly auditory, I think, for the people out there, other than just watching me smoke joints over here and Spartan Grown light up on the occasion over there. I got to get Doc in here with us smoking along.
I usually drift off camera to smoke my weed. I don't know. I'm like weed shy, smoking on camera. I don't know why.
It's okay.
I don't know. It shouldn't be contrived. That's my opinion. You shouldn't
It's
be
just because
doing
I'm
it like just cause, like, oh, we gotta do it. It's like, just do it because you want to be natural, and if you don't, that's cool too.
It's better for the algorithm to do it off the camera. I just am too lazy.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
But that aside, we have a great question from Seed Person One.
Controls my life.
Fuck the algorithm. We're not slaves
Every
to the
click
algorithm.
an algorithm. Nobody
Good
forget.
answer, Zach.
We don't have we're not sponsored. We don't go we're not even monetized on YouTube. We never are. Never will.
Yeah, but we still do want to get discovered by people, and it affects like that basic sense of discovery on YouTube, how many people they'll show our show to. We can still search for this channel a little bit easier than you can search for other channels too. So a lot of that, like, they'll start to really step on your channel.
Yeah, but when legalization drops and they pull off the censorship, maybe someday we'll get our own fucking channel, right?
We'll be treated like a regular channel, which is all we really ever ask for.
Exactly.
But, the funny thing is, when I look at the analytics, like 95 to 98% of how this show is discovered is by shared link. People literally sending the link to each other. They cannot shadow ban that.
Into the algorithm.
We're not in the algorithm.
Yeah, that's digital word of mouth. Come on.
Yeah, and it's okay. Maybe, I mean, I don't want to like nuke the channel and start a new one to get like a fresh take at the algorithm. To me, I'm happy with the group that we have. It makes it so we actually can come together and answer questions for people like Seed Person One, who says, Chief Home Grow, I just transplanted from a 5-gallon to a 10-gallon Stonington blend. How long should I veg in the 10-gallon before flipping? Personally, I like at least 1 week. If you've got the time, 2 weeks would probably give them a little bit stronger base. But I wouldn't go any longer than that, because when they get into flower, the roots tend to take off. 5 to 10 gallon is a pretty large step up. So I'd probably lean more towards the 2 weeks and make sure that they're growing healthy. If they weren't growing healthy when I transplanted in, I'd maybe give them a little more time. I definitely want to make sure that they're like vigorous and looking great in veg in that 10-gallon pot before I even think about putting them into flower as the final caveat. And then I'll pass it to whoever wants to jump in next.
Yeah, I would like to give it 2 weeks from 5 to 10 in the way that I'm growing in my system, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of factors depending on the strain, the soil, how long it would take. But I agree with Jack. If the plant ends up like looking really happy, and even if you see roots coming out the bottom, I'd say you definitely could shoot it right into flower then, or you could wait depending on how big you want it or what the plant's going to do in flower. If it's one that grows a lot in flower time, you might want to put it in a little earlier. But yeah, I think there's a lot of factors for that question. But
Like Mac 1 or like
Yeah.
Purple Urkel is a really slow grower and not a huge stretcher. So you might want to let it veg even longer. But if it was like Blue Dream or something that like a haze that just grows like crazy in flower, you might not have to wait as long to that point there, Tal.
That's kind of
And,
was the point I was going to go after, was like, it's not really a time thing. It's a size thing. It's like, how much size do you have to work with in flower, and how much bolt are you expecting on these plants? And it goes by, for me, that's how I always do it, is it goes by my veg. So it goes by the height of the plant. It's like, okay, generally speaking, most plants, if I don't know it, I'm going to expect a doubling, so I'll take half the height that I have to play with, half the height that I want the plant to finally be. And when it gets half that height, that's when I'm flipping.
yeah, but the earliest you do it is when the plant's adjusted and pretty much filled up the roots in that container, at least in my opinion. That, because if you do it too soon, it could be,
It's true.
it does mess with things a little bit. It could.
It makes it hard to water.
Or it doesn't have, it could make a watering issue where.
And that's true both ends of that too. Too soon or too late. If you get root
Yeah.
bound, you're gonna have
Yep.
to shock it by
You're right. You're right.
cutting the roots.
I would caution against doing it too soon myself personally.
Yeah. So
it
too
is
soon
easy to
would be like
overwater
a
just
week.
generally, and especially if you're in too large of a pot and didn't give it enough time to let the roots sort of take over that pot.
If you pull it out of the pot and the root ball doesn't stay together at all, you're probably too soon.
Yeah, but if you do
I
that,
hate
like,
when I do that too.
fuck
Me
up that
too.
plant. Don't be doing that.
Get good, pretty much, is what Tau's
That's
saying.
the
though.
real benefit of some of the transplanter pots, is you can kind of check and see how well it's holding together if you have any questions about that before you sort of like pull it all the way out of the pot and then you've gone too far.
Great point. Lots of good options out there. Even like fabric pot, you just cut it and bobby pin it back together or safety pin it together. But they got the Velcro ones. I use the Easy Swap pots, but there's a whole bunch of different systems out there now that allow you to check in on the roots before you transplant, which I think is kind of like if you have the ability as a home grower, why not? Give yourself that access. It's sort of like a cheat code to growing a little bit easier. You get to watch as they develop it. It literally teaches you visually as each plant grows a little bit different rate. You can see when the roots are colonizing versus when they're not, and how dense they're getting. And when they start to get root bound, you obviously don't want to let that happen. You can trim them back, but it is a cool ability to be able to snap the pot open and just look at them and snap it back shut if it's not ready. Does anybody else have thoughts for Seed Person 1 about how long to grow from 5 gallon to 10 gallon? Or do we want to move on to Cheecha B's question about her earth boxes?
Send
Ooh,
it.
that sounds right up my alley right there. Sip container.
I asked her a follow-up, so I'm just going to scroll really quick to make sure I'm not missing anything, because she said the word dirt, and then I said, like, can you give me a little bit more specifics on dirt? Is it like dirt from your yard, or is it like an old soil? And so I'm just trying to scroll
Ooh,
back
dirt
to
is dead. That's a dirty word. Ooh.
a lot of, the organic
We
people
want our
don't like to even hear the
soil-
word
we want our
dirt.
soil to be living soil, not dead dirt.
I'm still scrolling. I guess maybe Spartan, could you read her question? I think you may have, or somebody may have copied and pasted it into the Zoom chat over there. And
Let
while
me
you read
look.
that, I'll go and find the
I
follow-ups.
found it right here. I have had my earth boxes on my covered porch with dirt. I'm about to turn my what does it say, room back on. Is there anything I should do besides the norm? That's a good question. Yeah, bring it in for a few days, let it warm up. That soil block's gonna be cold as hell sitting outside. Might even be well, it won't be frozen. It was a little bit warmer today, but get it inside. And whatever your IPM spray is, if my go-to is wettable sulfur, but whatever your IPM spray is, I would do at least a fine mist on top of that soil. The cold weather's probably been your best IPM, so I wouldn't worry too much, but hey, it's better safe than sorry. Other than that, I would say do your normal.
As a note, I followed up, and when I asked like what dirt was, Cheecha B was just referring to their soil as dirt. So like old soil that they've been growing in. So it's like an actual soil mix that they
So I
specifically
assume
had for
whatever was
cannabis.
left in it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I would
Maybe like a-
re-amend it too. Like if you've grown something in it and you know that soil is probably spent, I would do a re-amendment, at least like a broad spectrum, like craft blend or a BioLive or some kind of broad spectrum, maybe
Even
I don't know.
tomato food,
Yeah, yeah.
like
Something.
literally anything that has like an NPK that will get you a little bit of juice back in the soil, because it's like some people kind of describe it a little bit as like a battery when you're growing in soil, and you got to make sure that it's charged up, and the plants take some of that juice out of that soil each run, and so making sure you get some of it back there. And you can even run a soil test. I think in Michigan there's plenty of it's a pretty
Yeah.
ag friendly state, and most of
MSU.
the you could, it's $25 or something at a state lab, get an idea of what your soil's testing at, and then maybe even specifically go to reamend the things that it's lacking in, which
Okay,
could
she
give
says
you a
she's
great
got
start.
that stuff. She's got it all, she says. So perfect. You could, I was gonna even recommend, if you didn't have that, you could even do a compost, compost on top, or worm casting. That would replace some of that stuff. But if you've got the craft blend, or you've got anything similar to that,
Craft blend,
BioLive,
BioLive, worm castings, gypsum,
transplants.
all that stuff
Should
is
she
like,
till it up a little, or should she just throw that shit
No.
on top?
I wouldn't. I would just throw it right on top. You can work that into the top layer with like a cultivator, or a little rake or whatever. But I wouldn't. I don't think there's any reason to till up the soil at all, really.
yeah, it's just like a scratch. Like the cultivator tool is like the 3-prong. For anybody who's listening, it's like a little handheld gardening tool. Most of you are probably already aware of. And instead of tilling the entire soil, just scratching that into the top few inches and mixing it up so that the amendments that you threw on there are more evenly distributed. And when you top water, a lot of that's going to trickle down into the soil and sort of enrich what you're growing in. So
It's really just to break up those amendments so that they don't clump together with water. Like if you if you put it like a blob of amendments in one spot and then water that, it's going to be a big brick of mineral. But mix it, the soil being kind of dry, it mixes really good with a dry mineral input. So mix it up in the soil, then water. Don't do it the other way.
also, I recommend wearing a mask when working with older, drier soils and dry amendments, just to prevent inhaling any of like the dusts and powders and things like that. You'd be surprised how much can get into your nose and throat when you're working with soil. When I haven't done it, I've regretted it in the past. And a local guy here ended up passing away, who was a gardener. He ended up getting like Legionnaire's disease from, I think he was like the compost flipper. But yeah, it's a thing that can happen. So good to make sure you have proper PPE when you're working with things like that. I will admit, I think he was an older guy who was a little bit vulnerable to things like that, but you never want to expose yourself if you don't have
I always
to.
wonder what's going to happen from all the recharge dust I've eaten in my day. Like, what's going to happen with that, man?
It's
A lot of
probably
microbes.
assimilated into you and become part of your microbiota, your
Yeah,
gut
for
biome.
sure.
So much of the stuff is similar. Like when you look at like what we eat versus what the plants eat, like calcium, magnesium, like all this stuff, we need it. Potassium, like we need that too. That is crucial for humans. And the reason we eat plants and, the things that we eat, even the meat eaters eat, like, cows eat grass or corn or whatever they're fed. But like it all comes back to this very similar common nutrient. So there is not to say that we're like plants, but it's interesting our connection with them and the exact same nutrient mixes, and a lot of the stuff. I think Cheecha B is gonna rock it with this reamendment. Once you, like Spartan said, warm it up. Maybe throw some microbes in there too would be the last thing I would suggest if you have them, or like bokashi or compost is another great thing just to
Compost, worm
liven it up a little bit.
castings. Yeah, any of that stuff.
Worm castings, if you don't want to do, like a lot of people were into teas for a while, but now I'm hearing more people that do like what they call an extract. So instead of
Yeah.
brewing it for a long time, you just take like worm castings, put it in like a 2-liter bottle with water, shake it up, and then pour that in. It just essentially gets some of the goodies out there and makes it spread a little bit more through the soil. And you can just throw the rest of this stuff right on top of the soil.
It was Collectimus's Coot. One of his favorite things to do is make like a slurry and then pour that out of the bucket right onto the top, like a big thick layer of this worm casting, thick watery worm castings, and just spread across the whole pot.
That's like my earthbox top. I pretty much cover it. Like I have the Spartan Grown Reamend recipe, and at the bottom I have like green stock additions, and it's like add an extra layer of worm castings, add a little bit extra bokashi, and maybe like I suggest some sort of mulch, but I think you have that on your more recent update where you have like your straw or the sticks and stems from your old plants as like a straw or hay. I don't know what it technically would be considered, but as some sort of mulch.
Now I'm
because-
using just the stalks of the, yeah, I guess it's just be the straw. It would be closer to a straw, I guess. Just the stalks, the old stalks of the cannabis plant. So it's all returning back into the soil from whence it came.
I think that it's crucial though for the soil people out there. If you're not already doing it, have some sort of covering on top of your soil,
I
a
agree.
mulch layer, whether it's your old stalks and stems, or rice hulls, or whatever it is. I just think any type of mulch layer, even like the plastic mulch layer on top of the earth boxes, can be really beneficial. Just to
The reason
keep-
why it's just like we all know, we've all heard the bigger roots, the bigger the fruits, and it extends the usable space for your roots, because if you don't have that layer on top, it's just gets all that water evaporation, and it gets dry up there, and your roots won't go up there. They'll stay down. They gotta stay where there's more moisture. So by putting a mulch layer on there, you're extending this more area, more nutrient that can be unlocked from those roots, and they can go all the way to the top of your pot and get a bigger root ball. Definitely mulch. I'm a big mulch fan.
Yeah, it kind of put me back to competitive with my cocoa grow speed and yields. By adding that mulch layer, I wasn't having as effective of growth when I wasn't using it, versus like when you grow in one medium and then you go to another medium, it's pretty if you're honest with yourself, you can see the differences. And the cocoa was kicking the shit out of my soil in just pots when I didn't have it covered with mulch layer and I didn't have a large enough pot of soil. Now that I'm in earth boxes and doing things right, even in like the solo cups and 1 gallon easy swap pots, properly using a mulch layer and giving them the right amount of water. I really am a big fan of the bottom watering, even in the earlier stages, just to prevent overwatering and allowing the evenness of the water. I think even with the saponin or like some sort of wetting agent, it's really tough to sometimes evenly get the water to go all the way through the soil if you're top watering it. It just sometimes wants to find that easiest path of resistance and just run right through the soil. And as much as I try to get the wetting agents in there, I think that bottom watering has shown me that it just more evenly saturates. And I still use a wetting agent in that case, but it just, the soil tends to get really well saturated through the bottom watering method. So with that said, we went a little bit over the 1 hour mark before I sent out the link. So I'm going to go ahead and write up my little message to the chat and let them know that they're going to be on Zoom live on YouTube, and to use their name and everything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the Zoom link for the chat.
Does anyone here, you had any experience with blue mots? I've heard of them. I'm familiar with them. I haven't used them personally myself, but there's a question in chat about mulch specifically. It said, do you mulch over top of those? And I was thinking, man, maybe just around it. But now I know there's some deeper ones that, okay, so ones that are deeper in the soil, maybe I would mulch over top of those, but the ones that are near the top, the shorter ones, I don't think you'd want to mulch over them, but I'm not familiar that much. I've never used them. I don't know if anybody else has. They always sound great, but I've never got much into them. I'm always worried about flooding.
I always see people flooding their shit with the blue mats. They might work
Yeah.
really well for a little while, but the blue mat soaker tape, it seems like to work a little bit better, but the little carrots and everything that you have to like put the water, it seems like a really smart system, like the physics of it, like how you have it like up above and you don't have to use electrical power. It's using gravity to use the gravity feed and whatever and drip out based on, and it's really interesting when you do dial it in, because I learned something about growing. Like M bar is a measurement of dampness in the soil, and they use that to tell when, and you can set between like 103 and 105 M bar, or like 80 and 90 or whatever it is. And so people really like to dial it in and figure out what works best for their plant, and it gives people something that they can measure. And I think when you measure something, you can improve it. And so I have seen some people really like them, but I've seen pretty much every single person I know who grows with them has flooded their thing at one point. And I'm not sure if it's on the blue mat or on the person, but it seems like if that many people have had it happen to them, I think the blue mat maybe needs to figure out like a safety to prevent the flooding of their grow room or the plants, because that's a big bummer when that happens.
But yeah, something I would do out in my vegetable garden, but maybe not chance it in my house. I'm just not familiar with it. I'm sure, like anything, you can learn them and never have an issue. You know what I mean? There might be a learning curve, but once you learn it, it might be super awesome. But
What's interesting is Adam from 2020 Mendocino, who grows out here in the commercial market.
I like
He
that. He's cool.
had it wasn't a blue mat, but I think it was called like a hydro mat or something. It was a bottom watering mat where they were using like flower beds, and they had these basically mats underneath the beds, and they
Autopot
wick
makes one
up.
of those.
Who is it?
Autopot makes one of those. It's a wicking mat.
Okay, so it's similar. It wasn't Autopot. It was a different brand, but the idea, same concept. The bed basically sat on top of a wicking mat, and from there it would, wick up, and they did a side by side grow. And in the California market, they have to send everything off to lab testing. They have to weigh everything up, and I think they said they got like 10, 15, maybe 20% more yield, and a little bit higher testing on the side that was being bottom watered, and so. To me, it showed, at least in their setup, it was better than their other method. I can't remember what the other method was,
Cool.
whether it was hand watered, top watered, or whatever it was. But I tried to find that post on his Instagram and I couldn't find it. I scrolled back through, he has like hundreds, maybe thousands of posts, and I looked and I looked and I looked last time we talked about this and I couldn't find it. So it's a little bit of a bummer, but we got Haas Farms who's about to jump in. So I'm going to go ahead and admit
cool.
them.
Haas Farms, man.
Anybody who
Look at-
joins,
Go
heads
ahead.
up, you're going to be muted when you come in. So you'll have to unmute yourself. He can't hear us yet. He's still just connecting his audio or their audio. I'm not sure if Haas Farms is a he or she or they. I never want to, label anybody. But Haas Farms is going to be joining us here soon, but they will be on mute, just like anybody else who joins. When you're joining, you'll be muted. So you'll have to unmute yourself to go ahead and introduce yourself. So Haas Farms, welcome in. How you doing tonight? Just make sure to hit unmute before you go ahead and start talking. They might still be getting set up as well. So, we lost them. Haas Farms out. Well, if anybody else would like to join, the pinned message in the chat is to our Zoom call. And otherwise, we can answer more questions if you guys would like to. It says more yield, but what about cannabinoid content? Rusty Nails, they had higher cannabinoid content in the like the bottom mat water section. It was just like a general overall improvement in both things, both the yield and the cannabinoid content, which I've seen in a couple of experiments, which I think just generally shows whatever was being done. I don't think that it's necessarily just the one element. It's really, really hard to isolate things down to one element, but I think you could generally say that the plants in the one condition were better taken care of. They were the cultivation practice, everything generally, they reached a higher potential.
The thing we need to mention, I think, with top feed, bottom feed is if you're watering, I agree with you, Jack. I think bottom feeding for watering is really an efficient way to grow plants, and there's a lot of benefits to it. But if you're fertigating, I think it's pretty dangerous to bottom feed. And there's still systems out there, popular ones, that are recommending sort of fertigating in the bottom feed system. And that definitely leads to salt buildup in the upper layers of the media. So it depends on how you're fertilizing, again, as a lot of things do. But for amended grows, I think bottom feeding is spot on. If you're fertigating, I have great hesitations about bottom feeding.
That's great advice, because I've seen a lot of autopot users who try to fertigate, and the autopot doesn't tend to like to work. I've seen people who've made it work. So if you go really low EC and you make sure that you're not ever letting it dry out, you can get it to work. But I just don't think it's as ideal as like what Dr. MJ is doing with the Halo, where you're just constantly able to kind of shower that medium with an appropriate EC. And flush it down to the level that's going to make the plant happy. The autopots, definitely they can work, but with fertigation, I think you can run into that EC buildup. And with an amended soil, especially with like the earth box, I've kind of heard people refer to the top as like the feeder roots, where you could pack it. You like, especially if you're noticing the plant starts to get hungry, you can literally just pack more earthworm castings or amendments on that top layer, and it's always got access to like clean, fresh, unfertigated water at the bottom. So it's got a mix of both. Like some of the roots at the top have access to the rich soil, and then the stuff at the bottom has access to just clean water. And there's even a little air gap in between, essentially, because as they drink that water, it goes down until it's completely dry, and then I refresh it. So there's a little air window in between. So it tends to work really well. I don't question when the plants grow well and are happy and yield excellently. So with that said, Cheecha B has joined us. Cheecha asked some great questions earlier about their Earthbox, and welcome in, Cheecha.
Cheers, guys. How have you been? How are all of you guys?
What's up, Cheech?
I'm well medicated. How you doing tonight?
Oh, doing pretty good. playing with my dog.
It's good.
But yeah,
So,
just
so do
chilling.
you have craft blend at home or BioLive or some kind of dry nutrient you can add to those earth boxes?
Yes, I have Dr. Earth. I have
Oh, cool.
I have worm castings. I have other nutrient
So
samples from, just events that I've been to. So
perfect. You're all set then. You got everything you need.
yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, that when I stopped growing, I don't know, for some reason, I just set them outside. So they've technically been outside all summer, but mostly the whole winter too. So
That
It could
winter
be a
had to kill off a
benefit.
lot of it. What
It
was
could
the
be a
base
benefit
soil?
though, because might have a bunch of overwintered natural microbes now that are acclimated to your, environment, right? So they might
right.
be badass. So
Yeah.
that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I did ask another question. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's the vent that exhausts out to, like, the outside. Well, I took the fan out of my tent, and when I turned it on, I was like, that zero pressure is not what it used to be. I mean, does it not? I don't know. I guess like before it was like, I don't know, that zero pressure, it like caved in the walls almost, you know what I
You might need to
mean?
clean your fan. You might need to take it
I
apart. And
cleaned it all. I cleaned it all. With so
How old's the
That-
fan?
Huh?
You think the fans lost suction, or do you think that the tent has become leakier?
Well, see, okay, so the way I have it exhaust out, so I have it in my room, and then my bathroom is right next to my room, and the cabinets are right up against where the tent is. So the exhaust pipe goes all the way through, and then just magically there happened to be a hole big, perfect size, so it exhausts right out underneath through the floor. So you don't even know it's there. Like, you don't know I'm growing unless I literally open the closet door and
Right.
say, here it is. So when I started to like get my room going, I moved some stuff out, and I noticed there was a hole in that pipe in the cabinet, or in the cupboard or whatever. And then I kept on looking, and there's a lot of them. So I'm just gonna replace it. But with that being said, I just turned
It's
it
leaking
on to
air.
see.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, I think it's that. But
Right.
is there a difference when you take the fan out?
You mean outside of the tent versus being
Yeah.
inside the tent?
Yeah,
No, the fans are actually slightly more efficient pushing the air than they are pulling the air, but really, like, I mean, it doesn't matter. So whether the fan, the inline fan is pushing or pulling, it's going to do almost the same sort of amount of work.
My fan is on top of my tent, which drops
Right.
a hose in, which connects to the carbon filter, which is sitting inside of the tent, which is
that's where
sleeved
my
off,
carbon filter
and it
is.
works just fine. I mean,
Now,
I've
see,
been
the
doing
only
it for
thing that I
years, as
have
long as
in
it's
my
proper power.
tent is the intake for the air. Then it goes to the tent or the fan, which sits on top of the tent, and then out through the carbon filter. So there's nothing basically inside the tent, just like sort of a hole where air gets sucked out.
Right. I thought
I wanna-
about taking both of them, like the carbon filter out too, and just have something like a little tube down in the tent, just because of space.
Yeah,
If it's
that's
too-
exactly, that's what I basically do. And they both work. The carbon filters can work by being pulled through or pushed through. And the inline fans will work very well being pulled through or pushed through.
Okay.
I want to give a second to welcome Hemp with GG, who's showing off their tent right here, and
Yeah, cheers.
it's looking pretty stacked. You got a whole bunch of plants packed in there. The canopy's looking pretty even. I know you really got it nice and flat before flip. It looks like the strains being different strains. Some of them want to get a little bit higher. I know you're giving us the shaky hand there, but that's it happens when you grow multiple
Tent, as
strains.
always.
Yes, I'm definitely OCD about the flatness, so that bothers me. But I do like the fact that she didn't branch off much. She really stayed together, even with some of that bolting action.
All right.
Yeah, that thing's nugged up all the way down. I mean, every couple inches, there's beautiful buds. This is a beautiful. Oh man, this is going to yield very, very well. This
Yeah,
tent.
it's a good.
Yeah, what day are we after flip here?
It'll be 6 weeks yesterday.
Okay.
I'm chopping the 21st, but the problem is there's different strains in here, like you mentioned. And in a sense, the back left and back right strain they're not aging at all because they're 10-week flowers, and these are 7 to 8. So definitely going to be some
Those are
different age
Acapulco
finishing.
Gold.
But the good thing is I do have another tent, which has this. They were all vegged in this tent. This has 3 of those older strains as well that are not as aged.
Damn, looking good, huh, for GG.
Indeed.
So the ideal is to take these 3 that are the older, longer flower period, put them in with these 2 longer flower periods, and then dry all the finished stuff over here in the 4x4 while everything
Okay.
finishes out.
Nice. I like
Gotcha.
it.
Making it work, man.
These are Acapulco Golds and Dosey. Yeah, I'm
Hey,
excited.
you
to
should
see
shout
it.
out you
Nice.
should shout out your channel, man. He just had me on his channel. It was a really cool show. I really enjoyed myself over there. I think people should check you out on YouTube.
Yeah, Hemp with GG on YouTube, or you can find me over on Coco for Cannabis as well, part of the New Year's Grow Challenge, and of course you can find me on Instagram. I appreciate you coming up again, Spark.
No problem, man. It was a fun time. Good talk.
It's great having you tonight, man. We appreciate you coming on, and I want to welcome in the dog doctor.
Nope. Good love, everybody.
That
Thank
is
you for having me.
a tent full of vegging plants. Boy, howdy.
Hey, what's up, buddy? Listen, what's that? How's the freak show looking, man?
He's
I
looking
know I just
great.
saw her yesterday, but I want to see her again.
The super
I was
freak.
taking some leaves. I was
Yeah,
taking some leaves from them. Work.
look at that
Woo!
thing, man.
That thing is crazy. I need to get some
I
of them
think
super
it's-
freaks.
But it's here like this. It's probably better contrast. She's beautiful. I can go there
Wow.
straight away.
Wow.
What are we looking at in this veg tent? What do we just see
Oh,
there?
sorry. Here it's my ranch cut, and back there it's the ice, the Amsterdam Amnesia ice. This is like day 5 or 6 flower, and yeah.
Are they
It's
going to
full.
stay in there throughout the flowering period?
Sir, yes, sir.
You're gonna clean it up, I'm imagining, in a little
Oh
bit.
yes. I'm gonna clean
I'm just,
all of
yeah,
this.
it's already really dense for having just flipped. Wow. Okay.
Now you know me. I like them.
You gotta
full.
pack it out, Doc.
I pack it out, and
Yeah.
then in a week here or so, a week and a half, so I will clean it up and take what I don't like it.
The
This
dog
way-
doctor can never have enough plants.
I don't know. I kind of use
He's
a
the
lot of
plant
medicine.
doctor.
I kind of consume a lot of medicine.
Never enough.
And now that I'm pressing it, I think that I feel that you will go faster. Don't ask me why.
I think, yeah, it's definitely a conundrum. It's more potent, but you can end up blowing through it. It gets your tolerance up, maybe. And I also
Yeah,
think you're losing
probably.
something when you press, even if it's like flower rosin. You're squeezing something out of it.
Am I showing anything?
I'm seeing a top
Yeah.
Yes.
bud going over through the lights.
I love it.
Okay, so that's
Oh, you
the.
can't bend that down though. I would encourage you to try, but yeah,
Dude.
it's hysterical.
That's I love it up there. The
I
freak
just
room
cheap
up
home grow
there.
hack had a plant that was getting a little too close to the light, and it was getting that kind of like white, Icarus flying too close to the sun burn. So I pulled that one like more towards the center because I have cob grow light set up still, and it was kind of directly underneath one of them at one of the more intense points of light. So I pulled it into another cola, and I had like a yellow highlighter just sitting behind me. I have like a little cup full of pens and pencils, and I clipped the highlighter to one of the branches and like slid it down so that the little X it made just kind of stayed in place. And I didn't have a little garden tie, but cheap home grow, as you don't need the perfect implement every time. You can make it work with what you have around. And those always kind of make me laugh because sometimes people want that like perfect tool and element or whatever they see on Instagram, the flashiest new thing. But you
There's
can
no perfect
make a lot work
anything in
with
life.
the shoestring budget.
This is the testers, the fast food testers. But going back to the perfect, I don't think there's
No.
anything perfect in life. So one needs to adapt to whatever conditions one have and use whatever tools you have. It's like a car. It's not so much the driver, the car, it's more of the driver. Why do you want a big Lamborghini if you don't know how to drive?
Hey, I'll take the Lambo and you could drive in the Yugo, and we'll see
Oh.
how it goes.
Okay.
Go.
Okay.
The Yugo from Yugoslavia. The Yugo.
There's a
Put it in
blast
H.
from the past, man. That's like a car that came out in the late 80s, I think. So
It's a Simpsons joke, I guess. It's an old reference, but yeah, the Yugo.
yeah.
So
thing.
here's my spinach.
Oh man, the freak show. Here it is. Super freak.
Yeah,
I
super
love
freak.
that, man.
Damn.
It's like a
That's
giant
so cool
fucking-
though.
That's beautiful, man.
If you guys grow marigolds, that's what that reminds me of, man. It reminds me of like the early veg of a marigold.
Yeah.
Free flower marigold. This is bizarre, man.
It
I
does
like
look
know
like
it's I know what
broccoli
it
or
is, but it's
something. It
just,
just doesn't look like cannabis.
At all.
especially from
No.
a zoomed back. Like when you look at it from way up at the top where he was.
No,
it's
from
like
here,
Even when you're
Yeah,
getting
it looks
close
like
to
a
it, it looks
little-
like broccoli, man. It just doesn't look like cannabis.
yeah,
like
it's so
these are
bizarre.
Like a bonsai
it
or
looks like
something.
kale. Kale. To me, it reminds me of kale.
Yeah.
Don't ask me why.
What's the flower like from it?
I have no idea. It's the first time I'm growing it.
It makes regular
so-
looking, not regular looking buds, but like the flower, the leaves still kind of look like that. The flowers are a little bit open, but it does make good smoke. I mean, I've smoked not the this particular super freak, but I've had some freak show that was really fire.
I'm really hoping that she's a keeper because she's so unique and beautiful that I kind of want to keep it just for the looks. But if she's not good medicine, she's not staying. But
That's the thing. You got to
that's-
Spartan kick it if it ain't good. You can't be like Tao growing that plant for 2 years and letting it just die and get nothing out of it.
Dude, I don't care if she's ugly as fuck as long as she's good medicine. Dude, it's all about the medicine for me.
That's what
And
And
I'm
how long
talking
has this
about.
one been growing? Is it a slower vegger?
I don't know, man. This might be a weird trim. I wonder what the sugar leaves are gonna look like if they're gonna have that kind of morphology. That might be-
This looks
that might
so
be-
interesting, I have to admit.
It looks
Yeah.
like it take
that might be
forever.
I
terrible.
kind of like how dense it is, but I feel like my IPM mind is going, I don't want to talk
Mold and
over
mildew, yeah.
speaking.
Exactly.
Oh,
Look how
dang, I
tight
didn't
the
even think
nodes
of
are
that.
too.
But the thing is, like at the same time,
Oh
it's
thick it
man,
is.
IPM.
got a lot of
It'd be
airflow.
hard to
through
get
it.
coverage. Hard to get coverage on
Very
this
hard.
plant. Very hard.
Oh yeah, I didn't.
That's
Yeah,
true.
instead of like
But-
one single blade, it's like a billion blades.
A billion blades.
Each leaf,
Billion.
each leaf, it's like the leaf, it's apart. She doesn't get connected on the.
It's
on
a
the
leaflet.
veins.
It's like a pinite.
Yeah, I mean, if
More
you
like
think
a-
about
almost
it,
like a
if
fern.
it's like a whole
Well,
like leaf,
The leaf
like
morphology,
pine.
but
You know?
yeah. They
I
call
love
it
it.
they call it
There's a word
pinate
for it.
something or other. Yeah, I'm forgetting the full phrase. But yeah.
so cool.
It's
I
it's
grow
I
a weird-
really,
that.
really hope she's
Yeah.
good.
Freak is an
venison.
appropriate term for this one because it definitely doesn't look anything like what most of us are growing. Even the ABC is like a little bit more normal looking, I would say. It's
Yeah.
not normal, but it definitely doesn't look
Right.
like this.
I love that each finger, it's like many leaves on it. But IPMing this, I didn't thought about that. Oh fucking hell!
Well, that's
This-
okay though. You know,
Yeah, man.
I
That's a
think it's actually
nightmare.
resistant. I've seen a lot of people grow it outdoor, greenhouse and full sun. So, I mean, if you can make it happen outdoor, you can make it happen indoor, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's true. Oh. And at last, this little thing over here.
That big old spear.
I wonder
Jeez.
if it's like more. I know that we're not looking at that plant from before, but I wonder if there's like I
can go
would love
back
to
to-
see physiologically if there's like more surface area per branch or so. I don't know. Like that might not be the correct metric, but I'd love to like see a comparison. It'd be very interesting.
Oh, would it be
There's
able to
definitely going to
collect
be more
would
leaf
it-
edge area
Yeah,
or
would it
more
be able
leaf
to
edge
collect-
area.
linear dimension or whatever. I don't know. if
Could-
that's
Is that
relevant.
desirable?
About
That's the real
stomata?
question.
But could that harvest more light from every angle because of that?
Yeah, I
I've
don't
heard the
know.
tips are like the more
No.
poisonous part to the pests. Like
U-
they can put out
usually-
like hydrogen peroxide or whatever in there that basically like makes them not enjoyable for things that want to eat them.
Yeah.
Really?
That's
Tell
right.
that to a fucking tell that to the rabbits, tell that to the fucking deer.
It's cumulative. Usually those effects are usually cumulative. At least
Should
for a
take
pest
some-
that's even moderately adapted. But yeah.
She tastes like lime.
Usually that's interesting. Usually a broader leaf is more
Lime.
efficient
Lime.
than
Yeah.
a smaller leaf, I believe.
She's tasting like lime.
Have y'all ever had-
lime tree leaves?
They make
Yeah.
these things called finger limes. They blew me away.
This
It
is
looks like
good.
little caviar almost, and you like squeeze out these almost like gel, like little ball, and it's lime. That's the weirdest thing.
Lime
ever.
like leaves is pretty fascinating. I just want to emphasize that. That's pretty cool. Like if
That's
that like,
yummy.
Freak Show has a
Really?
crazy wide profile. Like it can be grapey, it can be limey, it can be piney. Like I've heard lots and lots of different flavors coming out of these plants. It's like all
don't
over
know.
the board.
It'll be cool for your salads and stuff. Just throw a couple
Yeah.
leaves in the salad.
I'm loving
I've
it.
started eating raw cannabis as much as I can. I keep a little Tupperware and I eat all my de-leafed leaves that are not like dead or dying, like the healthy de-leaf stuff. I'll eat that as much as possible. And I notice I have a back pain from a car accident a few years ago. And when I eat a
Helps.
large volume of cannabis leaf throughout the day, I feel significantly lower pain, even with like regular cannabis use, RSO, everything else. I think the minor cannabinoids and everything else in there are great for inflammation and pain relief and things like that.
Hey,
This
dog
one is
doctor.
Yummy. Sorry, yes, sir.
What about Bob brings up an interesting or brought up an interesting point. That black large poster that you got on the right wall there of your tent. The previous tent. Sorry.
Even that
Exactly
one,
the
though.
same.
Oh,
Even
well,
that
let's
one.
see that one.
It's a photon drinker.
Yeah, that's a good
well,
point.
Well, is it hot? Touch the
is
black
it a
part of
heater?
that.
Yeah, that should be hotter.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
No, I can't point to where is my thermometer.
There
It's
appears to be a
definitely
sheen.
eating photons.
It,
And
it's
it's
just
definitely
yes,
going to be
yes.
lowering the PPFD that you would have gotten on that plant if it hadn't been there in that sort of critical space between light and canopy where reflectivity is so important.
Fair enough.
I understand that reflectivity is often at odds with, sort of our desires as online influencers or our IG photos or whatever else. But yeah, that's a pretty big black poster to be putting on.
How
the
much? I not to put you
Tell
on the spot, but I'm curious what like. I know it's hard to quantify,
We're
but what do
talking
you think?
100 to 200 ppfd losses. I've seen testing. Migro
Wow.
has done testing with
Wow.
mirrors.
More than you
He's
think.
done testing
Yeah.
with.
That's
he's done
why I
testing with
asked.
Mylar versus Diamond Mylar. The best thing in the grow tent world industry is look at the left side of his tent. You go back to that
Okay.
tent, dog doctor,
Go back
I'm
and
coming.
and then just pan to your left side. That
Yeah.
wall, that silver wall, that Mylar, that stuff is the
that side
best.
does look healthier. It does look
is-
a little bit bigger.
It's just it's better. It's the best quality. The reason they make grow tents out of Mylar is because it reflects really
Yes.
well, and
It's
it does
pretty
its
cheap on
job
both
amazingly. It's
And you
easy
can
to clean.
absolutely measure that. I should do this as a video too. I've thought about doing it, like putting a little sticker on the wall and seeing how much that affects light, because it definitely affects the light most where it's closest to, but it'll affect light throughout the entire grow space.
I can measure in lux, not in ppfd, because I use my phone for that.
Right, but you're not gonna.
But-
you don't have really a good comparison for that, anyways.
I don't know. No, I can compare the left side with the right side. That's what I was saying. So on the right side,
You would need to really close the door that's open and not be inside in order to get a good number. But let's see what it says, anyways.
In the high
Okay.
1900s,
the high
1950,
1900, let's keep the
Okay.
same height. Yep.
over 2000, 2300.
Over-
2200. What did I said before you even saw it? And there's
Yeah,
not
you
even,
called
like,
it, Jack.
It'd be even worse with the
Yeah.
tent closed. It is significant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's absolutely significant.
And yet with
removing the
that
walls,
handicap,
adjusting,
whoa.
doing almost anything to the walls really changes the test results that I measure a lot.
I didn't do
And
That's a
having
good
stuff
point.
up there, just make sure it's reflective as possible and small. I think the big Aptus black poster should go on the outside of your tent, not on the inside.
Yeah. I'm gonna.
I want
change
to say that despite that handicap, he has grown some monsters.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So-
Absolutely.
He's overcame
know.
it.
We're
It's
just fine tuning. We're just
that
fine
was-
tuning.
that was
This
a
is great
great
refinement. This is great
constructive
refinement.
comment from the chat.
absolutely.
It's everywhere,
The chat
look.
pointed that out, and we literally had a live demonstration of how important stuff like that
Oh,
is.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and
absolutely.
to what about Bob out there? Thanks.
Well, and you
for-
could even
for
say to
pointing that
Aptus,
out.
send me a
Credit.
Mylar sticker, or send me a
No.
Mylar, something that will be reflective, or even a white one. That's
I'm gonna
white.
talk with them and to explain exactly. Actually, I send him the link. He normally see the shows when I come in, and he will see the difference. So he probably will think of that for the next banners he sends to
Yeah.
whatever he's sending. It
And
looks
just
cool.
make a
although.
white.
Especially if
Change
they
it
want to
from black to
occupy
white.
that space in your tent. I mean, that's performance space. That's where the tent sort
Exactly.
of does its work.
their plants will look better. Your plants will look better grown with their nutrients if they, set you up with
Exactly,
a
yeah.
more ideal situation. But I want to welcome in Okie Grower, who has joined us as well. I'm going to give them the spotlight for a little
Yes.
bit. Cheers, Okie.
Hey,
How's
buddy.
it going, guys? All right, let me pull my phone case off here.
Cheers.
If you turn it to the side,
get
like
a
yours
little
is up and
clear.
down.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Much
There you
better.
My bad.
Looks great. Lots of
Yeah, man,
plants.
Nice.
I remember there was some New England rock candy or something in this tent, if I'm remembering correctly. It's on the one side. There's a
Close.
giant one and
Holy
then a little one.
shit.
Yeah,
Damn.
that's the
Damn.
Hindu root beer.
Hindu root beer. I knew it was one of Kyle's
Yeah,
creations.
and it's
Damn!
stretched all
Look
the
at
way.
Dude, what happened to plants? They're growing so much lately.
Oh my dude, earth boxes
That's
or city
awesome.
pickers crushing.
Yep, city pickers.
Oh,
Oh,
nice.
Doing it.
yeah.
2
Look at
plants
the
per.
stalks. Damn.
Got 3 in this one.
That's
Hey,
amazing
shit.
job, buddy.
Oh,
Bottomless pot deal. Works
I
real
love this
good.
Huh.
figure so much.
I love how
man.
easy you're making it on yourself and you're still getting great results. That's like one of my favorite
Oh
things.
yeah,
I have to try that.
mine too. Pretty good. Got some.
That
purple
just
coming
looks
in
cool. I
there.
gotta say, I like the way you sort of pulled that off.
I was kind of worried about it, thinking that they'd run out of food too quick. So I've been using that the smart carbon from Brandon Roast,
Yeah, I love that shit.
House
man.
Earthworks, and it's just been doing. I haven't had any problems. I used it twice in veg, and twice in transition, and then twice in flower. That was it.
Nice. Oh yeah, man.
Nice.
In here with the light.
I usually only give them once, but I got a lot smaller plants than what you got.
Yeah. And then they got the little shorty back here in the corner. I wish this one would have been in the front. It would have been easier to.
How are those Hindu root beer smelling?
Uh,
What's the giant one smell like and what's the tiny one smell like?
I can't even reach the tiny one, so I don't know. Getting
How tall is that?
Go down
I
low.
measured it the
Crawl
other
in
day.
there.
It's 7 foot.
7-foot plant inside. I got to do hats off, man. Anything, even
What's that
6-foot
in
plant
meters?
inside is that's impressive.
I
That's
had to,
30 meters.
you know,
A
I've
meter
been
How many
eighty?
put the
weeks in
line all the
flower?
way as far as it would go.
It's almost 2 meters.
Yeah, a meter 80, something like this. That's huge. Nice. You have
It's
high-
185 or no, a
Big
little
plants,
taller
you
than
could use a
185.
little bit more light probably, but yeah.
7
Yeah, I've
feet
got-
is like
See,
2 meters
I
exactly.
got this off your recommendation here.
Okay.
It's a little
Coco.
over 2 meters, I think.
Is that looks like a P series?
Yeah, it's the
2.06
P
is-
series.
or 2.1.
1500. That looks like okay, is that like a Mars Hydro clone? right there?
Kinda, yeah. It's a lamp soul, pretty much just like it. It's 150 watt too. And
Okay.
I've got the Spider Farmer 100 and the HLG 100.
So total of like 500 watts in there.
Yeah, just about. Yeah,
What's the square footage of that space?
4x5.
I mean, that's not terrible, but you got big plants. I mean, they could certainly you're filling in the space pretty well.
He started with
Yeah.
one light, Doc. He's just building it as it goes.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
shit is-
Adding
Yeah.
on, adding on. You could probably do
Yeah,
one more of
start-
those lights pretty safely and put it somewhere in the
Put it
middle,
in the middle
and
or something.
you'd be
Yeah.
close
Where all
to
my cords are
full
hanging.
lit.
I need to mount those to the ceiling.
Yeah, the cable management, maybe you could step up your cable management game a little bit, but
Yeah,
Well,
just
they
a little
can-
bit.
I would recommend to save up and get one big light, and then you could use those to supplement if you want to, but that one big light is going to be intense enough to maybe stop some of the stretch. I think this height is a little bit of a extra bolt
Yeah.
just because of the low intensity of the light.
I agree. I
The
think you just
HLG
need
100.
more light. I think it would be easiest to run with one big light, but I agree, Spartan. I also think you could just add another little light. It makes it a little bit harder to run a light with grow with 5 lights as opposed to 1, but I
think if
agree you need
you
more.
have any buddies in Oklahoma or anywhere that is willing to get a lightly used grow light at a discount, you could sell some of those lights to a friend who's going to get into growing or already growing, and then use that as some of your either down payment or cover the entire cost of getting yourself a light that'll cover this entire space. And Black Friday is usually the time to do it, but I know Doc's got some discount codes for some really affordable lights that cover a 4x5 or 5x5 pretty well.
Second best time. Well, it depends. Not everybody does 420 sales, but 420 sales are pretty good deals usually for manufacturers that run them if you can sort of like wait around for sales. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to sort of approach this. You know, I'm going to be doing a couple of giveaways here soon. You can always win one of the ones that we're giving away too. We're giving away a fold 8 right now in the Grower Love giveaway and our deals and discounts page. So that'd be perfect for that space.
Yeah, is that the Metagrow?
Yeah, I think you can run one or two of those lights.
Nice,
5x4, right? So like 20 square feet. Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
5x4 is also a little tough because a lot of it is either made for a 5x5 or a 4x4. So, but there are a couple that will crush.
I would get one of the 5x5 lights and run it with the bars parallel to the sort of going across the 4-foot dimension and, you know, parallel to the longer dimension, or perpendicular rather to the 5-foot dimension.
There's not a wall or anything
to full power,
right?
but you may have to dim it down a little bit for one of like the 700 watt lights.
Okay, is there like, if you back up right now, there's not like a frame that's blocking this in, is there? Or
it's my closet.
Oh, okay, so it's actually okay.
Like a walk-in closet.
Yeah. I put
the other thing that I just saw.
That's awesome.
Get a mylar roll and use that for like the hanging fabric door and put that in as many other places as you can. That'll really help the lighting too.
Yeah, that's I didn't even think about that. See, I've got this plastic stuff up here.
Get the mylar. It's not that much more money, and it's really, you can get like a big roll, like 3.5 or 3 foot long roll, or wide roll rather, of the diamond pattern mylar on Amazon, or I might sell it in grow shops, but it's definitely available on Amazon. It's not that expensive, and
for the diamond.
You find a lot of spaces, a lot of places to use that in your closet there.
The diamond is so much better than the flat. The flat stuff creates hot spots. Yeah,
Yep.
The diamond really makes a huge difference. It evenly distributes. That is like the
I'll definitely look at that.
Golden standard, I would say, of reflectivity for growing is diamond type pattern mylar.
I got one of those rolls to make the test area that you guys have all probably seen in my videos where I tested lights. Those walls are made with just a roll of that mylar, wrapped across foam board actually.
Some people like Panda film. What's the difference in Panda film and mylar?
Panda film's not as reflective. It's a little bit better. It's a bigger piece sometimes, so you can do more with it. And they think it's better for blocking out the light. But the mylar that I used is going to block 100% of the light anyways. It's thick enough. So I don't think there's much of an advantage for the Panda film.
Panda film is the eco, like the budget option. Orca is like the high quality option. Orca film is a higher like gloss white or whatever it is. Like it is a higher reflectivity level of white.
It's actually matte. It's weird as hell, but yeah.
Oh, it's matte. Okay, so I was totally wrong on the gloss, but the idea that Orca is significantly more reflective,
which is good because then the matte finish acts almost like what you're talking about with the diamonds, where the spread of the light is way better.
I saw tents start using
that's why gloss is
matte white for a while.
Why not paint the room white? Is there a difference between like having a room?
White. Yep, flat white, not gloss. But if you do flat white, that's like 90% reflectivity.
There's a special white paint for reflection that even reflects over 100%. They say. I don't know. It's how you can do that.
Whites. You can't go over 100%.
Exactly.
Well, it produces light.
I don't know how you can.
They got to contact NASA if that's the case.
Yeah, I want to put a solar panel on that.
Created a perpetual motion machine, and
it's not worth the expense of that white though. There's like a super white and there's like a super black. Like a artist in India has like a patent on this black.
You mean Vanta black?
Yeah, but there's also like a super pink or whatever. The pink is pink, the black is black, and I'm sure there is a version of that, the whitest white. And I don't think that it would be worth the extra little percentage when mylar is available, or even just the white is good enough. It's in that high 90%. But a black poster with a color
for sure
diagram or whatever, that's a different
that's fighting
standard.
the other way.
Good.
And with that said, it's that time where we let Spartan Grown give his final thoughts and shout out because he's got some dogs to take care of and refill the trays and get ready for that Michigan Bros Grow Show.
It's Jack. Thanks, guys. It was awesome hanging. I love it. All the people that jumped on this time. It was super cool. Shout out to Chad. I see some new faces in there, some old faces in there. Both cool. I just am excited. I don't know. I feel recharged or whatever about the community of people just getting together, sharing ideas, and getting past the ego. It's refreshing. It's what was needed in this industry, and I think that I just applaud everybody that's a part of it. And I think what we can do instead of focusing on the bad things, sometimes we should focus on the good things and just give us all self a pat on the back for the things we're doing right. So just lead by example, right? So I think
Shout out to that.
yeah, I'll leave it at that
Yes.
and just say keep on growing. And I've got one more podcast to do here. I'll jumping over to Mr. Bros Grow Show, and I'll be there till 11 o'clock tonight. So I'll see you guys there in about 15 minutes.
Peace out, boys.
Good luck,
Love,
Spartan.
Spartan.
Thank you,
Have a
Spartan.
good
Always a
night.
pleasure. The Canna Marathon, man.
Thanks for the advice.
The man is going everywhere.
First love.
It's good. It's important that he gets out there on all the platforms, on all the different channels, because he's got good information to spread
Yeah.
and a lot of positive. I really do agree with him. So often I see within any community, literally pick a community, whether it's like gaming, growing, anything, you'll find like, oh, Xbox versus PlayStation or PC versus console, and it's like. It's just entertainment. We're all having fun. Like, why even go head to head with people and get in arguments and comments? It's like coco versus soil, organic versus synthetic, blah 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 blah. It's like we're all
Because
just
someone
growing
is wrong
cannabis.
on
Let's
the
fight
internet.
together.
Oh,
I mean, we all want to
wrong.
feel right at the end of the day, but really the main thing that matters is that we all can continue to keep our right to grow if we have it, and if you don't have the right to grow, working to get your state, country, city, wherever you're at, to be in a place where you can legally grow like many of us can and not have to worry about the stress of your door being kicked in by the police. And for so long, many of us and still many out there, I mean, Dog Doctor is one example, having to come on with a mask on, and where he's at, it's not.
Sorry, guys.
It's no, we wouldn't want you to come on and endanger
I
your
know,
safety.
no.
I think that you're doing a good example of showing that you should stay anonymous if you're in that kind of place. And I think that it's a security issue, and it's unfortunate, but it
protect
is the way of the
yourself.
world. And we can't just pretend like it's all sunshine and rainbows. Like if you expose your identity in that situation, it is a risk. So we appreciate that you're able to come on and chat and have fun with us and show off the garden and not have to put yourself at as much of a risk by doing things like that. So it's always a pleasure to have you. And I think that you're one of the many examples of people out there who's, I think, on the right side of history, but the wrong side of the law, unfortunately, where you're at.
Mhm.
And so we appreciate you, Dog Doctor. You really,
Okay.
it can't be understated how much people like yourselves are, having to risk their livelihoods essentially just for, a plant that many of us really enjoy as medicine. So it's great that many places are changing their perspective. And
It's a plant, dude.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a plant. It's
speaking of
changing.
plants, you had a very stretchy bolt plant, and we had a question right before we kind of let everybody jump in. And if they're still here, WV Grower says, at Cheap Home Grow, what's your methods for slowing down stretch / bolting in the first few weeks? And I know Dr. MJ always cringes at this, like,
That's
don't slow
why
down the
we're
stretch,
calling it
use
the bolt now. That's like one of the main reasons that I want to call it the bolt, is so people stop trying to crush its dreams. But that's okay. If you need to, next time just flip sooner.
But
If he's an automatic like
what?
mine.
Doc is saying,
I've
okay,
heard,
the bolt
I've
or
heard
the
a couple
stretch
things.
is beneficial. You want to use it to your advantage, is what Doc is kind of saying. And a lot of
Right.
people are having this fight against it because maybe they don't have enough grow space, or maybe they flip too late. And so they're
Right.
like, oh, why do these plants grow so much? But that's like never a thing farmers or growers say. They're always like, oh, yes, my plants are growing so much. Like, that's a great
Right.
thing. They don't
And they're
want
not
it to be
stretching
stunted.
properly. There's a thing that plants do called stretching, and you can get your seedlings to stretch if you don't give them enough light. We were a little bit worried about the whose plants was it that was just on that didn't maybe not have enough light.
Oaky Grower.
Oh, that was Oaky Grower, right?
Perhaps.
That's a kind of stretch where the plant's actually sort of literally stretching. If you give the plants too much far red, you can get them to stretch like that too. That's different than what plants do when they're bolting, when they enter reproductive growth and they go through this period of really vigorous growth, not stretch, but growth. And calling it a stretch makes growers think that it's this like bad thing that like, you know, seedlings do when they don't get enough light. And like, I should try to make it stop doing that.
Well, listen, Doc, let me give you probably what I think is happening. People are looking at their plants and they're going, I'd rather have buds where that stem is right now.
But
So
it's not that it's just growing
bad
longer stems, Tao. That's why this stretch word is the wrong idea.
That's the idea, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the wrong
more
idea.
nodes.
Now, secondly, though, let me rephrase the question for your brain, Doc. Is there a way to create an environment where the bolt isn't as pronounced as it usually is?
Why would you want to do that?
Because of what I just said, or if you're
but Tom, you're missing the point. Like during that bolting, the plant is going to be putting on buds as well as stem. It's not just putting on extra stem. That's what you would think by calling it the stretch, but it's actually just putting on nodes really fast. And you can count that how long it takes your plants to add nodes. This is a good thing for growers to become familiar with, both like, you know, we know it all. Like when we first start growing, it's like, okay, it's 3 days to the first node, to the second node or whatever. But how long then can you get your plant to grow 2 nodes in a day in a 24-hour period? Sure. During the bolt, you can get your plants to grow 2 nodes during a 24-hour period. So it's not like waiting, you know, several days.
Right, it's growing in both ways.
And that's what we want. So if you want fewer nodes, flip earlier, but don't try to suppress the bolt. There's no reason to suppress the bolt. It's good growth. Grow less in veg.
That would be a good experiment. If you top right before you stick it into flower, or if you give it an extended dark period. I've heard stories that giving it 48 hours of total darkness before they flipped it created less bolting.
That's Kyle.
Why would you not? Okay, you know why? Because you're screwing with the plant. You're screwing with the plant to the point that the plant is now like in panic. You just stressed it out to the ends of the earth by going 48 hours in the dark, and you are probably going to screw it up so much that it's going to lose out on some of that healthy, vigorous growth that you would have otherwise gotten. So no, I'll never recommend. I think that's a terrible idea. I don't think we should try to stress out our plants to prevent them from doing their healthy reproductive growth. That
thinks it was dying.
Is a healthy reproductive growth.
I think it was. I think the plant thinks it was dying. When you put it in a 48-hour darkness, the plant literally, if you go 72 hours, some of them will just die. So like, it is close. It is close to killing the plant. Like I know people who've killed. Kyle himself, who recommended this, he has killed plants doing it. 72-hour darkness, 48-hour darkness, because they don't like being in the dark for that long, especially.
You guys never had kids that were misbehaving. I'm joking.
I'll say this: it's like there's a genetic memory, and the plant's like remembering like the last extinction event. The clouds blocked out the sky. It's like not again.
Right.
Like
right.
I'll be good.
No, the plant really is going into panic mode. I mean, plants don't know
48-hour darkness
what's going on, but they know that they're not getting light when they should have, and they need to figure out how they're going to stay alive if they're going to stay alive, and they're going to go do some like sort of extraordinary things to try to do that. But that's not something that normally happens in nature. The plants don't get plunged into 48 hours of darkness like ever. And it gets back to, I think, why I'm so interested in calling it the bolt instead of the stretch is so growers start to think about it differently, because so many growers think of it as being a problem when it's really not a problem. I don't think you should ever try to suppress it or make it go away or make it be smaller. Plan for it. Plan ahead. Realize that your plants are going to bolt, and that's going to affect how big they end up being. And I think the biggest time that growers try to suppress this is because they veg too long, they don't have enough space left, and they're like, at that point, plants grow too big because otherwise I'm going to have to like cull something or move to a bigger tent or something. But that's more.
It teaches them. They can cut them.
They
could tie them. They could bend them. There's so many options.
Yeah,
but that being said,
I scrub them.
We got to wrap it up.
You
Cheecha
can
B.
increase the monosilica if you're using it. By increasing the doses, it will make the internodes shorter space. It will create shorter plants if that's what they're looking for.
And like even like blue, but certain spectrums can make it a little bit tighter. But I think I agree on with what Doc is saying. We
Yeah,
want productive,
yeah.
healthy, fast growth, ideally.
Hell
With
yeah.
that said, I want to go ahead and give the guests this evening a chance to give their final thoughts and shout out. First, starting with Cheecha B. Where
Of
can the people
course.
find you?
Anyways, cheers to everyone. Thanks for doing this, kind of opening up and letting everybody hang out. Thanks for all the advice. Yeah. Happy Sunday. And you can find me on Instagram. I do have a YouTube. But yeah, cheers to all of you guys.
Great YouTube
Cheers.
channel. Definitely check out Cheecha B on YouTube. Good stuff over there. And Okie Grower is up next. Okie, you with us? Oh,
Sorry
he is.
there. Yeah, sorry. Thanks for having me, guys. Thanks for all the tips and everything, and learned a lot from watching these shows. So
Hey, and even I would say, even though we talked about a lot about the lights, if it's not like within your budget or doable right now, you're killing it. You're rocking it. You're making it work. So keep on growing. You're doing a lot right, and you've expanded it to a place where you're growing more medicine at home for yourself than most people are able to. So hats off to you. You're doing great things over there, and thanks for showing off the garden and coming in
Yeah,
for another night. We always appreciate you.
yeah, I
Absolutely.
appreciate it, man. Really appreciate
Next
it.
up, Hemp with GG. You're muted.
You're muted, Gigi.
Hey, Hemp with GG. Final thoughts and shout out from you, and let the people know where they can find
GG.
you.
I was on mute.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Seeing you didn't hear anything. You can definitely find me over on Coco for Cannabis, Hemp with GG. You can find me on YouTube, Hemp with GG, and Instagram. Every Sunday we do a live show, 4:20 p.m. EST over on the YouTube channel. Thanks for having me. You always have all the guests that I look up to and respect, and you also help all of us new growers. So I appreciate everyone, and growers love.
Grow love to you, and thank you so much for coming and showing off your garden. It's looking great. We always appreciate having you. And
Grower
last
love,
and certainly
Gigi.
not least of our guests this evening, we've got the Dog Doctor.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me. Grow love, Jack, MJ, Spartan, Shot, everybody. You guys also, Secha, GG, Oki. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to see your gardens also. And I'm Dog Doctor. You can find me on Instagram, Morning Grow Diaries as Dog Doctor Official. And I would like to shout out to Actus Nutrients for feeding my plants, and Fast Buds, Stick Stalkers, Humboldt, and Royal Queen Seeds now for sending me the seeds for me to grow. I truly appreciate it. Grows love, everybody. Keep on growing and always believing. Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you for joining us.
Gigi, please
Next up,
mute.
I just muted him. Next up, we've got Noah. We were like getting him to unmute earlier, and then we needed him to mute now. But Hemp with GD, we appreciate you. And Dog Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. And next up, we got Noah the Grower as the first panelist this evening.
Yeah, I had a blast. Sorry, towards NFL playoffs, it's kind of tough for me. Plus, I've had a lot of stuff going on, but I had a great time today. I love the clone talk earlier. I was really intently listening, and always learn stuff from all you guys. And I love to put my thoughts out there too. So see everybody here coming up next week, and everybody have a good show. And growers love to everyone.
Growers love to you as well. And next up, Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the show. I enjoyed all our special guests. I hope that Tao knows how much I love and appreciate him and his spirit. But I get really sort of passionate about some subjects, like straight out of the blue. I'm like, why am I getting so passionate about the stretch and the ball? But like, it animated me today, like nobody's business. So that was fun for me, Tao. I hope that you take it in good fun as well. I will say, if all we're talking about is reducing internode during that growth, yeah, sure, just more blue, less red, and you can have like smaller internodal growth. Somebody suggested that in the chat. Chat, you guys were on fire today, pointing out excellent things, posing wonderful questions, and keeping us all sort of on task here. So excellent job. The show wouldn't be what it is without the wonderful chatters that we have that show up every week, and those of you that just come every once in a while. And again, thanks to those that joined us on the panel. I'm Dr. MJ Coco, cocoforcannabis.com. Check out my YouTube channel, and I will see you guys next week.
Thanks again, Doc. Always great to have you. And next up, we've got Matt Gates.
Yeah, I have to agree. The chat was particularly Ebullient and energetic. We got a lot of cool questions, and I enjoyed answering a bunch of them in the chat as well as verbally. But if you're interested in more plant health oriented questions, there's a few ways that I can help you with that. One is that you can check me out at zentanol.com for professional inquiries. You can also check me out at YouTube on my Zentanol YouTube channel, which has a lot of educational information for people who are interested not only for cannabis, but also other plants and general IPM concepts. And you can also contact me through Discord. You can get access to my Discord server through my Patreon account, also called Zentanol, for $1 a month. And there's a community of growers and other sorts of people who are interested in identification and all things IPM. So you can check me out on one of those 3 locations, as well as Instagram at SyncAngel and Twitter at SyncAngel.
I will admit the identification is actually how I first came across your page, and I still appreciate that a lot, getting to know all the different pests that are out there and what they're called, the scientific name and then the common name. And then I'm able to look into the science that you've often posted, or the pest primers and ways to fight them and combat them and prevent them, all that good stuff. So really appreciate your content, and thank you for answering the questions in the chat and both on the show this evening. We always appreciate your feedback in all topics, IPM and otherwise. And I believe next up we have, last and certainly not least of our panelists, the American one.
Jack, as always, thanks for hosting, and shout out to everyone who came up and showed their gardens and talked about them. Cheecha B, Oki, Grower, Hemp with Gigi, Dog Doctor, Official. Always good to see all them peoples. It's good to see everyone in chat. Zentanol, Dr. MJ Coco. I hope I didn't get you too riled up, but I like playing devil's advocate. That was fun, yeah. And shout out to ETG Acres, Brandon Rust, and Kyle Breeder, Pure Breeding, in their absence. We love them boys too, and hope they're doing great. And yeah, shout out to everyone in chat. And like I said, man, make this week better than last week and not as good as the one after. We'll catch you on the rebounds.
The American one just made my job a whole lot easier. Shout out to everyone he just shouted out, because he just did it beautifully. I'm not going to go through the list again, but I totally agree with that. And I want to third or fourth the comment earlier that the chat was really on fire tonight. Great questions, just amazing interaction, kept us going, and they still do continue to. I mean, we wouldn't be at 201 episodes if it weren't for the chat. A lot of every third episode, it seems at this point, is chat Q&A and panel, which I think a lot of us are fans of. A lot of people say these are their favorite episodes, so a lot of people look forward to that, and I like it myself personally as a mix of things that we do, and I'm continuing to plan on having more of these moving forward. So if you like that and you'd want to continue to see more of it, stick around. You'll find it right here. You can find me at Jack Greenstock on Instagram primarily, Jack_Greenstock on Twitter. My backup account is also that on Instagram. But if you want to email me, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. And if you'd like a book, 50 Strains of Green is on 50strains.com. So thank you everybody for coming. We really do. Can't even understate how much we appreciate all of you, both the people that listen live and the people that jump on the panel with us, and the listeners of the podcast afterwards. You all matter a lot to us, and keep us motivated to grow better ourselves and keep on growing and inspire and influence the growers out there. So thank you to all of you, and have a great week. Catch y'all next week. Jack Greenstock signing out.
Later, everyone.
Grower love,
We
everyone.
love everybody.